you're head of the S&P Sephardi community here in the UK, and we haven't spoken a great deal on JTV about how, and I'm thinking not so much sociologically, but also theologically, how the Muslim and Jewish worlds have influenced and interacted with each other over the last 1,000 years. And I just wondered if you had any interesting insights to share on that matter, because we haven't really delved into that much.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a very vast topic, to open first of all. And I will also say that being, part of the S&P here in the country, the Spanish and Portuguese, they were not very much influenced by the Muslim world at all, because they were very Western. They remained in the West for a long time. But in general, the Sephardim, I mean, a huge constituency of mine right now are Iraqi Jews, Egyptian Jews, Lebanese Jews. It depends on which time we're talking about. If you go back to the time of the Rambam, 1200s, that kind of time, where in Spain, at least in southern Spain, what's known as the Andalusia, there were times of Muslim rule in that period, in that area, which was the height of enlightenment of the day. They were translating Greek philosophy into Arabic. There was a tremendous amount of robust academic thought and study. And you have so many of the Spanish Sephardi scholars, rabbis. There were poets. There were military generals. There were all kinds of different aspects of society that the Sephardic Jews integrated into, and that was very much because of the nature of the Muslim society, and where they very much embraced the world and tried to integrate into the world. But that was at that time. That was then. As you fast forward maybe to 300 years ago, when you look at the Jews that were living in the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, the Middle East, they're living in Muslim societies, and those societies are not as enlightened as the old Spanish, of the 11th and 12th centuries, that era, but they are nonetheless still very much integrated into society. When I mean they, I mean the Jews who lived in Muslim lands, didn't really live in ghettos. They didn't live in a great deal of persecution. I mean, there were pockets of persecution here and there, but for the most part, they lived in peace for hundreds of years with their Arab neighbors. They were considered second-class citizens, but nonetheless integrated into society very, very much so. And so there was always a tradition, even from those old Spaniards that had moved throughout the Mediterranean basin after the exile, after 1492, the expulsion from Spain and the Inquisition, who had moved throughout the Middle East, the Mediterranean basin, the Middle East and North Africa. They always maintained a culture of integrating into the world around them and the society around them. And that was very much part of the influence of Islam, or the Islamic societies of the time that we saw ourselves. I say that noting that I'm speaking in broad strokes, right? So there are always, of course, I'm speaking very sweepingly. There are always, specifics that may not fall squarely into that description. But overall, it was very much that way. And so it is very much of the Sephardi tradition that we tend to have tradition of integrating into society. At the same time, we have a very strong tradition of Torah study, of the text of the written Torah being very much on our lips, if you will, on our mouth. So the way that we taught our children was very much in the kitab. That's what it was called, the kitab, which was to be able to learn the psukim, the actual verses of the Torah, to pronounce them properly, to sing them properly, to have them as part of our mind and psyche, as very much part of our identity. So in a genuine Sephardi synagogue, you pronounce a word incorrectly, and they kill you. You're not allowed to pronounce things incorrectly. You're not allowed to quote psukim incorrectly. That's very much the bedrock of how it is that we hold ourselves. So that becomes the center of our identity. And with that, we go out into the world And we use that as our framework in order to be able to engage and integrate. At the heart of it all, and I think that this does have to do with being in an Islamic society, is that the one thing that we kind of share in a very general way, not in a very specific philosophical way, is that we see that God is one and that he's the sole source of all that is. And so the world is an expression of God. And it's something we're supposed to experience and learn about in order to be able to connect with him and get to know him, so to speak.
And I think part of a result of just integrating into the world around you without ever compromising one's own values or identity that happened in the Sephardi world is it's allowed for, I think, a slightly more open-mindedness and less of a requirement for clear labels and dividing oneself into lots of different bubbles and sects. And I think one of the things that I find comes very naturally to Sephardi communities and families is there may well be a variety within the family or community of lifestyles or levels of observance, but there's no real distinctions that are made. You know, you're a Jew.
Well, yeah, but there are many reasons for that. I mean, for the Sephardim, it's true that, you know, the level of observance for us is important, but we don't reject necessarily people based on their level of observance, right? We don't define them as being different. You do have, I mean, one does have to remember that for the most part, the Sephardim in the Middle East didn't experience the Enlightenment in any significant way. And so they didn't have to deal with the major challenges that the Enlightenment brought. At the same time, the Sephardim didn't live in ghettos and didn't live in isolated situations. And I don't say that as criticism to the Ashkenazim. The Ashkenazim very often had to. They had no choice but to live that way. But whatever it is, the reality was that they were able to kind of like hold themselves in conclave, away from what was going on in the outside world. And when they had to, when the gates were kind of ripped open from that, there was a tremendous challenge. How do we do this now? How do we reintegrate? Whereas for the Sephardim, they had 1,000 years of tradition of integration. And so it was something that, like, as you say, very, very natural. And that element of enlightenment, of opening the ghettos, of coming into society, of questioning how it is that we integrate our religious life into society, for many of the Ashkenazim was a new and uncharted territory, and that created many divisions in terms of how do we do this. Whereas for the Sephardim, it was much more natural.
Yeah, absolutely. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. I actually have like 4 other questions that I wanted to ask you, which means
we'll do it again. We'll have to do another time.
That's what I was about to say. It means that I'm not going to let you go. We're going to have to do this again sometime.
I look forward.
But thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to welcoming you back to the UK soon whenever you come.
I'll be back soon. Only wait a couple of weeks. But always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Ollie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi.